Good evening. On behalf of the Detroit Institute of Arts and its auxiliary, the Friends of Asian Arts and Cultures, I'd like to thank you for joining us in celebrating Asian Pacific American Heritage Month. We hope you've been able to enjoy our month-long series. Please visit the APAHM playlist on the DIA's YouTube channel to see all of the programs that have already premiered and that will premiere this weekend. Tonight, we will have a conversation exploring tea cultures from China, Japan, and Korea and their influence on our society today. I am grateful to introduce our panelists, Shereb Chen, an e-resource discovery librarian with University Libraries of Ohio State University, who specializes in Tibetan Buddhist studies and classic Tibetan translations. Chen is also on the faculty of OSU's East Asian Studies Center and advisor to an OSU student organization, Tea Friends. Yoon Hee Kim, founder of TeaClassics and founding director of Korean Tea Culture Foundation, is a certified tea master with Teaculture Association of Korea and was also appointed as Korea's tea ambassador by the governor of Korea's largest tea growing province for her work in promoting Korean teas and tea culture worldwide. For over 20 years, Yoon Hee Kim has shared her knowledge and love of tea with industry professionals and tea enthusiasts alike through a wide range of immersive in-person and virtual programs, conducting traditional tea ceremonies and leading educational tea experiences in the US and abroad. Dr. Midori McKeon is a licensed Omote Senke tea practitioner and professor at San Francisco State University. Dr. McKeon created the first university courses on Omote Senke style tea ceremony and tea culture in the United States, and has been organizing the Ocha Zanmai San Francisco International Conference on Chinoyu and Tea Culture since 2012. And moderating tonight's conversation is Dr. Katharine P. Burnett, a professor of art history and East Asian studies at the University of California, Davis, and founding director of the Global Tea Initiative for Study of Tea Culture and Science. Her publications include Shaping Chinese Art History, Pang Yuanji and his painting collection, and Dimensions of Originality, Essays on 17th Century Chinese Art, Theory, and Criticism, which is being translated into Chinese. Dr. Burnett was recently given the O-Cha Pioneer Award by the World Green Tea Association of Shizuoka Prefectural Government in Japan, and the Chancellor's Award for International Engagement from the University of California, Davis. I'd like to welcome all of you and enjoy the conversation.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to this wonderful afternoon or evening where you are. It's really a great pleasure to be here with you and the DIA. I grew up in Michigan and went to grad school at University of Michigan, so it's nice to be back. This evening, we have the honor to discuss aspects of important tea traditions in East Asia, China, Japan, and Korea. These traditions are so rich and, well, steeped in history that we can't possibly touch on everything we'd love to share with you. Nonetheless, we're going to do our best in the time that we have. So I will be asking each of the panelists a question, and we'll take the same question in turn, and then we'll proceed with the next question, and hope to have a really fun conversation. And again, thank you all for being with us. It's really an honor for each of us to be here with you. So first question is about a general one about tea culture. You know, how would you describe tea culture in China or Japan or Korea? And what is special or unique about it? Has it been a beverage, status symbol, religion, or something else? And what do you think? Do all these cultures share the same spirit, be it Zen or respectfulness, joy, or something else? So we're going to generally go in the order that our librarians order our book collections, CJK, China, Japan, and Korea. So we're going to start first with Sherab Chen. Would you please take the floor?
Okay, my turn. Okay, so first I really want to thank DIA to invite me and all of us to have this wonderful conversation. And I'm really honored, and I think I'm going to learn a lot from each other. And also, I really hope to continue this kind of conversation. This is really meaningful and really rare. And thank you so much for having me here, and especially in the pandemic, and we can still meeting online. This is really a fortunate opportunity. So, sorry, I don't want to keep too long, but okay, I'll try to remember the question. So, what's tea culture? Unfortunately, I have to begin it. So I think one thing we have to keep in mind is tea is both a stable drink for not only Chinese, but I dare to say all the East Asian people. It is both a stable drink, like an everyday beverage, and also it can also entertain and to become a kind of a more refined activities like art and painting, music. Everything can go together with it. So another thing is, if I remember correctly, we Chinese have a tendency not to call the tea thing. Okay, we are talking about enjoy tea together. You can always have tea, your personal, your own along, of course, but I think it's more fun to have tea together. But Chinese tend to not call it a ceremony, no matter what this word translate or interpret it. We more like the idea of a gathering. So imagine tea gathering. So it's always like for friendship, for love, for fun, and even for business. You can have tea, you can serve tea. Also, usually tea gathering is an invited event. You are invited. And so the one you invite others is a host, and then you will be the guest, you invited. But we also expect kind of like an accident visiting, or even like a sudden visiting, like during the cold weather, the snowing, but then my friend from far and coming to my home, and I was really welcome and then I was served tea. So basically in China, whenever the guest coming, we will always serve tea. So tea, in that sense, more like a stable food. So sorry, Katharine, how's my time, and did I miss any?
You're good. You're fine.
Right.
Do you want to perhaps talk about some of the special aspects of serving tea, and is there a special role for the guest, a special role for the host beyond just being there to be convivial?
Yeah, for a very normal or relaxed manner, there's not much rule. You just have the tea, and normally the guest won't be picky. He or she will enjoy whatever tea the host has and offer. So, but nowadays when I tend to separate the tea from daily life. Also, you can have a fun. You can like arrangement arrange the tea gathering. Then there's something else. Then you have a certain arrangement. Everything. I believe it's also shared in other East Asian countries. So I think I will pick up more detail specific when the conversation goes on. So I want to give
Sure.
this time to Midori and
Okay. Yeah, sure. It is interesting about Chinese tea culture. I was at a tea fair, an international tea fair in southern China a couple years ago, and was talking about different tea cultures, and most of the audience was from China, of course. And at one point, I commented on the different tea cultures around the world, and this woman, I remember seeing her face, and she looked at me and it's like, what are you talking about? And what was fascinating was that I realized in that moment how everybody knows their tea culture and thinks their tea culture is wonderful, which it is, no doubt about it. But it's also fun to learn about other people's tea culture. And so through that, so let's now turn to Midori and think about Japanese tea culture.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to join a discussion on such a timely and interesting topic with specialists from other cultures. Let me briefly give you an overview of Japanese tea ceremony history. The history of Japanese tea culture has been everything that you have just mentioned. A beverage, status symbol, association with religion, spirituality, philosophy, medicine, art, hospitality, and politics. First, taking an overview of Japanese history of tea consumption, we see an interesting magic number of 400 years. Japan saw a significant change or a new development.
You're good. You're good.
Uh-huh.
You're fine.
New development approximately every 400 years since circa 800 CE. China invented 3 different methods of tea preparation as a beverage: boiling, whipping, and steeping. And every 400 years, Japan imported one of these 3 methods. Tang Dynasty's boiled tea culture came in circa 800. Song Dynasty's whipped tea culture, circa 1200. Ming Dynasty's steeped tea culture, circa 1600. Boiled tea culture stayed within the confines of prestigious Buddhist temples and the imperial court and did not reach the commoners. Whipped tea culture spread first mainly to Zen monasteries, the ruling warrior classes, aristocrats, and rich merchants, and eventually reached the commoners in the pre-modern and modern ages. It still has a sense of prestige attached to it. The steeped tea or sencha leaf tea culture spread rapidly and reached all strata of society during the Tokugawa shogunate or Edo period and became the way that common people enjoy tea. Chanoyu developed from Chinese whipped tea culture is unique in that it is the only surviving and thriving tea ceremony that uses powder tea in the whole world. I would like to mention the following 3 things as the characteristics of Japanese tea culture. All of these 3 regard how Japanized the Chinese tea culture. First, Japanese created tea utensils using local materials while paying great respect to precious Chinese imports. And quickly, this is a real Chinese tea ball from the 14th century. There's a real impression of tea leaf, body tea leaf.
Beautiful.
And this is a Japanese version of tea ball. And it may come in different colors. And these grays were, this gray was found in ancient capital Kyoto. Number 2, created a special space, chashitsu or tea rooms, dedicated to the use in the tea ceremony. And 3, established elaborate procedures for the way of tea in Japanese chanoyu or chado or sado, and under the influence of Zen Buddhism, attached to deeper philosophical, spiritual qualities to the act of making tea and sharing it with guests. Sen no Rikyu refined and established tea procedures in the latter half of the 16th century, while serving the despot Toyotomi Hideyoshi at that time as his tea teacher, and responding to his extravagant and flashy taste for tea gatherings as appropriate, Rikyu himself pursued more humble and austere style of tea. It is called wabi-cha, wabi-style tea. Wabi is understood as a state of mind that appreciates what can be generally regarded as imperfections and finds satisfaction with deprivation. Wabi-cha uses minimal number of utensils with refined but subdued sense of beauty. Harmony, respect, purity, and tranquility are the four precepts of Riku's tea, which remain central to the tea ceremony practiced in modern times.
Oh, that was lovely. Thank you, Midori. So let's see then what happens in Korea with tea. Yoon Hee?
Hi, Catherine. Hi, everyone. Let me begin by reiterating what everyone else has said. Thank you very much to DIA for this invitation. What a wonderful way to spend an afternoon or evening chatting about teas, and especially comparing and talking about the respective cultures in the 3 East Asian countries. Let me begin slightly different by reading 2 quick poems about tea. And one was written in the 19th century by who would be considered the equivalent of Lu Yu for Korea. He's known as one of the tea sages or the tea saint, Choi. There are actually 3 that really transformed the modern tea culture in Korea because of the historical aspect of what was going on at that time during the Joseon Dynasty. But in his book, Dongdasong, known as the Hymn to Eastern Tea at that time would be known as Teas of Korea, Venerable Choi wrote, "Tea is the spirit of water. Water is the physical essence of tea. If water is not true, the spirit would not appear. If tea is not true, the physical essence cannot be seen. Even if the physical essence and spirit are together, one must be careful not to overdo it and miss true harmony." And that is one of the pure essence of what Korean tea philosophy is about. Only when the true harmony is not lost can the spirit and wholeness of tea be realized, wrote Choi Sansa in Dongdasong. And then wrote much later, in a different century, someone who was revered as the greatest leader of Buddhism, one of the most revered Buddhist monks of his time, who passed away about 10 years ago. Venerable Papjong wrote, "What brings happiness? Beauty, moderation, and gratitude. I find great joy in the scent of a cup of tea. Simple and just following nature." So in some ways, rooted in harmony, purity, essence of in connection with nature and etiquette are the type of philosophy found and in the Korean tea culture. Now, Korean tea culture, like Japanese and the Chinese tea culture, one, we have so much we owe to the Mecca of tea, to what the Chinese did. Much of what we did followed what was going on during the Tang Dynasty, during the Song Dynasty, and the Ming Dynasty, until such a time it became also our own, that worked within our own cultures and history and specific regional and what was happening in our own countries. That said, if you are a tea enthusiast all over anywhere in the world, there's very good likelihood you have known about Japanese teas and Chinese teas for a very long time. But perhaps you might have just heard a smidgen about teas from Korea, or perhaps this is the first time. And there is a reason for that, and that is probably while we share a lot of similarities, one of the greatest differences that sets aside Korea from the two East Asian countries, our neighboring countries, is that Korea's teas have not been as well known. And part of it is because unlike Japan and China, where from once it began, their tea history and culture was allowed to develop. Whereas Korea, both because of internal religious persecutions, as well as the 2 wars that devastated the country and the 35 years of Japanese colonialization rule of Korea, all of those added to a tea culture that was not allowed to thrive or to develop in its own organic manner, good or bad. And in fact, there have been at least a few incidences during its 2,000 years plus year of Korean tea history where tea had to take, in some ways, it didn't disappear, thankfully. It did not disappear, but it had to go either underground or take a proverbial backseat with the very those who could, the minority of aristocrats, and especially the Buddhist monks, who kept the tea culture going. It really wasn't until the late 1960s and early 1970s, after the two wars, after Korea began to stand up, if you will, on its own, began to dust off all of that devastation from the war and begin to have economic stands again, that was Korea able to then look at. Then to look at its niceties. I think I say this often when I talk about Korean tea. One of the oldest adages in Korean tea, Korean culture is, if your tummy is not full, you can't begin to think about niceties in life. So when your entire country is so devastated from economic devastation from the wars and such, you really can't be thinking about how can we talk about tea? How can we talk about other things? But in the late 60s, it was the dains or chains, literally meaning tea person or tea folks. And for example, a tea master, while it may be noted as a tea master, you would say they're a dain. The dains around the country began to gather and say, we need to remember and bring and codify and record and remember what our regional tea ceremony service was, what our styles were, and to make sure that this does not disappear from our culture. And so since the late 60s, early 70s, the latest renaissance of Korean tea culture, it's pretty darn strong. So it began in 48 AD. It's a bit controversial. Most textbooks would say Korean tea originated in the Shilla dynasty when emissaries from Korea were sent to Tang dynasty and brought back tea seedlings, which were then by royal decree sent up to what is now known as the Hadong tea region, which is at the foothills of Mount Jiri, and that's where it was planted. But there's also somewhat legendary, somewhat mythical, because there are some records, but more and more scholars are coming forward with evidence that suggests that in 47 AD, from Sichuan province in China, left an Indian princess whose clan had migrated to Sichuan and who came to southern part of Korea in an area called Kinhe, or what at that time was known as the fourth kingdom as Kaya or Kara, to marry the king, the founding king of that kingdom, known Kim Suro-wan. And along with her treasures for the marriage was actually tea seedlings from Sichuan province. Therefore, the China jets, and that were sent up to the mountains by Kaya. Only then did they find there was already indigenous tea plants growing in Korea. However, nobody believes that there was tea beverage taking place at that time. So I believe tea actually originated in 48 AD, but that tea culture in Korea probably didn't really begin until the Shilla dynasty. So you've got like the 48 AD up to about 900 period, and then 900 or so period to about the 1392 period, that is the Goryeo dynasty, which is really truly the renaissance of tea, a renaissance of culture and art in Korea, where you've got scholars and literary and poets, and the arts just flourished, and at the same time, so did everything about tea. It was the Buddhist monks and the royal court that elevated tea during the early periods. It was that original king of Kaya in 48 AD, who when he passed as a beloved king, his successors began to do what we do in Korea as well as in other Asian cultures, which was a memorial rite, memorial service that included your foods and such. I know I'm probably running out of time, so I'll wrap it up. In that offerings were tea, and that began to be known as darye, as a memorial service to Kim Suro-wan, which eventually became known as darye, which actually stands for tea etiquette, tea proprietary, thus Korean tea ceremony. And a Korean tea ceremony is broken into multitudes. You have the ladies' tea ceremony, which can be loose leaf, as well as powder ceremony. You have the ceremony, and so on. But for the moment, real quick, I'm going to just say, for now, tea culture has modernized to this current time, where you have tea classes being taught as part of the character building law that was created about 5 years ago. So elementary school students are taking tea classes in their curriculum. You have tea classes for youngsters all the way to professionals to PhD programs. You have tea associations that gather and attend tea festivals by the busloads around the country. And tea is very much, as Sherab said as well, both a way to hospitality. It's very much part of the daily hospitality. No one would come into a home without being offered tea. That said, because of the broken development, cha in Korea at some point began to mean everything that is beverage, not just Camellia sinensis tea.
That's fascinating. Thank you so much. And that leads us right directly into our next question. So let's consider how we each think about how Asian tea culture has impacted or is impacting American culture and the arts today. Who wants to start? Would you like to take this, Sherab or Midori? Midori, go ahead.
Okay. The Japanese tea culture's uniqueness may be to find beauty and something precious in paucity rather than in excess. I can't express it well, but a stem or two of natural flowers rather than a whole vase full of flowers produced commercially, where they are expressive beauty. Bare walls with one scroll of calligraphy instead of walls covered by paintings, pictures, and mirrors. A small portion of food exquisitely prepared and artistically presented in the middle of a plate. The sense that one is more satisfying than many. The sense of space that is not threatened by the fear. The sense of space that is not threatened by the fear of looking into the void. That kind of aesthetics and mentality, or even spirituality, may be influencing some architecture, restaurant cuisine, healthier diet, and performing and visual art.
Yeah, I think that's really a nicely put. And when you think about dining out at a fine restaurant, often the way the food is placed on the plate has really adopted Japanese sensibilities to a great deal. That's very true. And so, Sherab,
Yes.
would you like to comment?
Yes, I'm not sure the East Asian tea culture has already impacted the Western or American culture at all, but I'm trying to gather something, and I wrote this thing down. So mostly based on my personal experience, I have to say that. And before I started, I want to acknowledge I know several American friends who are just born in the States. They really learned Chinese, Japanese, Korean tea. I mean, they are really tea masters. Mm-hmm. I have to acknowledge that. But in average, my feeling is the tea culture is still a long way to go in the United States. Yeah. Here, let me just give you some kind of contradictory ideas. Mm. To me, most of the beverage in the States is what I call grab and go. You grab and go, become two G's, right? But for tea, you have to stop and steep. So everything is made in the tin. You open up, even the tea. If you go to grocery, any grocery store, all the tea are tea bags. You rarely can find a section that has whole leaf tea. Why tea bag? Because grab and go, ready to go, convenient. Cultural impact. When I came to the States, 20 years ago, I couldn't find a cup that has a lid, because the culture here is cold beverage or coffee. Mm-hmm. And for coffee is the only thing you might have a lid, but that is made for car. You have a coffee mug because you don't want to split, so you have a cover, you have a lid. Other than that, every coffee mug has no lid. Every cup in the United States has no lid. So I ended up with Seattle first. Couldn't find a cup with lid because I want to have a hot beverage. I want to steep tea. Cannot do it. Then I went to New York and I went to the Chinese grocery store or Asian grocery store. Okay, I found a tea cup. All right, there. So one thing. Second, consumption and conservation. Everything in the States, you made to consume. It's a product, it's a mechanic, it is, you pay for it. You buy it, that's yours. You can do whatever you can. And basically it's a one-time thing. So the tea bag, I even come to the States, I still have the habit to make 2 infusions with American tea bags. And I was loved by American colleagues because they only dip the tea bag once and toast it. So American tea for 1 cup, for Chinese, at least several infusions we want to infuse the tea. Consumption and conservation. CC.
You make such good points. I really appreciate that, those observations. Yeah. And I think having said that, and one of the things that's interesting is that increasingly people in the United States are learning about tea.
Oh, yeah.
As you're pointing out. And there is no doubt that for the most part, American tea culture is either sweet tea, iced tea, or the bottled tea, or the tea bag tea. But we can think of those as gateway drugs to a better product, the steeped tea that actually, as you point out, can have numerous infusions, sometimes as few as 3 or 4, sometimes as many as 12, because the quality of the leaf is so good, and the nutritive value in the leaf is so high that it might be more expensive, but when you pay for it at the counter, but over time it actually is less expensive because the quality is so good and you can use it many days. Sometimes I will brew a pot of tea and I can't possibly drink as much tea as it could make, even if I use a small teapot, or maybe it's not that small, but I actually let it sit and dry out and then re-steep it the next day. It may not be the best way of making tea according to true tea connoisseurs, but there's still so much flavor in the leaf that I feel wasteful just throwing it out. But one of the things that's interesting in the United States is that our students are getting more and more interested in studying tea. We're starting to develop a curriculum so that people can come to UC Davis to study tea, culture, and science. And our tea clubs are very active and interested, and students are constantly contacting me from around the world wanting to come and study with us. And so I think that the US tea industry is seeing a marked rapid trajectory of increasing marketability. And although it's already 12 billion or even 20 billion, if you count everything, and that's mostly ready to drink, it's going to catch up to the coffee, beer, and wine industries, which are at 70, 80, and 112 or something like that billion. And if you think that tea is the most consumed prepared beverage in the world, there's room to grow. Anyway, it's fascinating.
Katharine, if I may just interject or add a couple of things.
Sure.
If you're thinking about, as we look at the influence of Asian tea culture to modern day here in this country, I think I agree very much with much of what has already been said. Certainly when Midori talks about the culinary end of things, you can see the influence of not just Japanese, but the way tea service is offered or tea is offered in certain restaurants. Certainly the tea rooms, it wasn't long ago that it was hard to find even a good British style afternoon tea service anywhere in this country, with the rare exception of maybe some hotels, but they were pretty much run of the mill, if you will. Now, while for those of us who've been promoting this for the past 20, 30 years, the changes have not come fast enough we look to, for example, like the wine industry and how quickly wine went from white, rosé, and red to everyone being a connoisseur of wine to a large degree, and with wine sommeliers and wine menus and wine pairings. So for those of us, we've been looking to that in a similar fashion, and it hasn't come fast enough. However, that said, you can see restaurants from TeaClassics, from Samovar in San Francisco to Tea Company in New York, or the way 11 Madison is providing a tableside tea service. So it has influenced, not fast enough. Arts-wise, again, there's been quite a bit that has been taken. So if you look at, for example, number of years ago, there is a Canadian-French artist, Gregory Corbera, who did a worldwide ashes and snow nomadic exhibit. And part of the beautiful exhibit that went around the world included these layers and layers of gorgeous draperies that were all done using, in this case, hibiscus, but they were using tea dyes. And that's something that's been in the arts in Asia for a very long time. Yeah. And so you do see that type of art influencing into the culture here. One of the, and I do think, and I agree with you, Katharine, that what's been lovely to see is really serious-minded, from the right heart intention, young folks that want to learn about tea in a true sense, not as a trendy thing, but really want to understand it and to study it. Flip side of that is that we walk a very dangerous line here in the West with too many people who have tasted something, find something that's a little bit trend, it's a little bit of a margin of difference that sets them aside, and all of a sudden they are experts, and therefore, dare I say, cultural appropriation is run amok in this country when it comes to Asian tea culture.
Well, that leads actually really nicely into the next question, Yoon Hee. So this is fun. So then, having said that, how do each of you think that tea might bring us together, or that does bring us together? People, this is a famous attribute of tea. How does it bring people together?
Just for one.
Yeah. Well, sure. This is a great example, to be sure. Do you want to, Sherab or Midori, take a turn?
Yeah. How does tea bring people together?
Yeah.
By the wonderful nature of tea itself and people's innate desire to congregate. Tea is perfect for social gatherings. People love tea. It's been a historically proven fact that people want tea. Even wars were fought, triggered by people's desire to have a steady import of tea. People want tea. This COVID-19 pandemic made us realize how precious and pleasurable it is to just get together with other people and chat over a cup of delicious beverage. Tea is delicious, flavorful, relaxing, and at the same time making people keep awake and alert. And it's good even for the health, with its nutritional components. It's a pleasure just to choose from different kinds of tea. And tea goes together with everything, meals, desserts of all kinds, and even with other kinds of tea. And drinking different tea does not make any conflict in your stomach or your system. So it is a gentler beverage, a peaceful beverage in your system. And alcohol consumption could cause some problems during and after gathering, but tea does not.
Right. I really want to piggyback what you said. And
go ahead.
Yes, I think this is also a perfect time three of us can talk about the special of the tea plant. the tea tree, the tea plant, and the tea leaf, and the essence of tea. This is really amazing, different beverage. Let's compare, like Midori said, wine or liquor culture. I forgot this. There's a Greek term that there's like a wine culture or alcohol culture, and that root deeply it is to have a high. You want to enjoy some consensual. I mean, rooted. I'm not talking about the daily like consumption of like one cup of wine before sleep. That doesn't cost nothing. But the real alcohol culture, the liquor culture, is you want to get high. You want to forget something. You want to relax, and then you want to release whatever something. So that is one of the culture, little bit different from the East Asian, where we want to have something that definitely we want to relax. But as Midori said, we also want to stay awake. And there is something standing in between. That is coffee. So coffee is supposed to also help you to stay awake. But if you become a heavy coffee drinker, then you got something called addiction. And then one day, if you don't drink coffee, you're shaking, your head is shaking. But this kind of thing rarely happens for tea. I know there are some tea, what do we call tea ghosts? They drink too much tea, and then if they don't, suddenly one day there's no tea, they might get lost. But normally tea won't bring you to that state. So tea, the caffeine in tea is different from the caffeine in coffee.
Yes.
And Katharine can definitely, more in this science area. But I read several research papers that says, say, if you drink coffee, you also get awake, but you start to lose your focus. But tea, once you drink tea, you stay awake. At the same time, you relax, and at the same time, you don't lose focus. That's why Buddhist practitioners like tea, because tea help you stay relaxed, focus. That's very important. You can relax and then lose focus. That's no point. Like a martial arts, you must relax, but you must focus. How to do that? Because tension is there. So that's one thing for tea. And also, as Midori said, tea is more peaceful, friendship. It's no challenge. In the one table, two Chinese people will, what they call they shot, and they compare. One person persuade, please drink, and then one get lost, and then one get drunk.
Yeah.
But tea is not that. You persuade people drink tea, but you don't force him or her, and and also there's no compete. Like who can drink? Like I can drink 3 pot of tea. No, nobody say that. Okay, so it's more peaceful, more friendship, more somewhat. I don't know.
It's not competitive, as you say, but tea certainly is. Well, with each cup, there's probably no beverage that has as many stories and legends, not only about what it is and it isn't, but all the teas have stories. And tea, I think I've shared this before, where every leaf, wherever tea has landed, anywhere in all the history and in all of the countries, it is that one thing that seamlessly and without imposing itself on anyone or anything, but becomes seamlessly incorporated into daily fabric, both in a formal, informal, casual. It's what connects the multi-generations, the grandparents and the grandchildren and the families. It may not be about competition, but you sit down for a cup of tea. Most people do not end with a single cup of tea. There is a saying that says, you sit down for a cup of tea, and next thing you know, everybody develops a heavy bottom because we don't get up. You enjoy. And all the changes that happens in the world, what is true connections? It's when you relax with that cup of tea and you begin to connect as human to human, and you begin to share each other's stories. So tea intrinsically does connect. Tea intrinsically carries with it, with every cup, histories of cultures, and you can sit wherever you are and with a single cup, a single sip, connect with all corners of the world, and you can learn through a cup of tea. You can learn and travel to corners and cultures of the world you might not otherwise be introduced to.
Yeah, that's a wonderful point. That's a really wonderful point. So let's do one more question, because I see we're running out of time, and we have a very special dance performance that we want to all watch in a moment. But very briefly, can you comment on current trends in East Asian tea culture? You might touch on artworks, art objects, artifacts, tea ceremony, the things that you use for tea. Let's say, Midori, would you like to start?
Okay.
But briefly.
I would say the challenges are not only in the artifacts and objects, but also in our state of mind. And because of the deprivation caused by the pandemic, we were given a chance to look deeper into our tea practice and think what is really important or essential for enjoying tea under these very difficult circumstances. A new procedure might become a part of official procedures as a result of these rethinking. For example, in Japanese tea ceremony, we drink tea from one cup, and many people drink from the same cup from exactly the same point. And drinking 60 like that, but due to the pandemic, drinking 60 from an individual bowl rather than sharing one bowl of tea with several people may be incorporated into an official kind of ceremony or option. And
that's fascinating.
At the same time that we have realized what a delight it is to be able to just get together and have a cup of tea. The fundamental pleasure of tea is not only in the individual cup of tea in the form of delicious beverage, but also in the shared time and space together with each other. So we have recognized that its importance. So when we come once again enjoy tea in normal way with friends and colleagues, it will be beyond the normal and bring a new pleasure to all of us. Yeah. And I think the prevalent, very prominent trend is to put matcha tea powder in everything.
Oh, yes, absolutely.
Matcha ice cream.
Yeah.
I have eaten up matcha Kit Kat. I want to show you, but I couldn't resist the temptation.
Katharine, real quick, when you were talking about the influence also, in addition to the matcha powder on everything, but food, certainly, tea as an food ingredient, which has been utilized in the 3 countries for a very long time, is catching on here. But also, I don't think it's just tea alone, especially during the pandemic period. I think more and more people have realized the importance of mindfulness, and people are beginning to understand and appreciate and learning and develop a practice of meditation. But meditation and mindfulness and tea, in fact, tea meditation, I've been asked to offer several classes through large conventions and such that needed to do wellness programs. And they sought after for tea meditation. So I think the kind of influences is not just tea separate, but all of the related as well, with the food, with the arts, with mindfulness, with well-being all around. But also tea festivals. You asked about the current tea culture trends. Well, tea festivals are everywhere in Asia. If you go to Korea, for example, springtime and fall time, you will see tea festivals, large and small, tea competitions, national tea competitions, for tea ceremony competitions for youngsters from kindergarten up to high school to professionals, and tea expos, not just for the professionals, but they will be held in all regions. But just about 10 or 12 years ago, tea festivals began sprouting up here in the US and in Canada as well. And so
Yep.
that is a trend that is definitely picked up from Asia, as well as objects, the tea ceramics, the teaware, the collections. Because once you start drinking tea and you realize how beautiful a certain teaware might be, or hand hammered pewter ware, or the hagiwares, that this is a Korean tea bowl that influenced the Japanese hagiware back in the day. Once you start collecting, it's not only art, but it's functional art.
Yeah.
And so that's become a major trend here as well. And
That's wonderful. Yeah, thank you.
Are being asked for here as well.
Yeah, that's really, really great points. And I'm with you. The definition of a teapot collector is you can't, you just need one more. But
or perhaps 2 or 3 more.
Yeah, right. Sherab, we'll give you the last opportunity to speak.
If we have time, I want to bring something. I think I'm trying to cover. We definitely trying to cover lots, but I think I have to fight with my what I can say. So I want to bring in one interesting, maybe Midori, maybe Yoon Hee can understand me, or Katharine, you can even have fun. Do you know the word kung fu?
Yeah.
Okay. Whenever people say kung fu, kung fu is a Cantonese. It's not really a what I say. I say kung fu, but it doesn't make sense. So kung fu. So whenever people think kung fu, they think about Chinese martial art, isn't it? But there is a tea style called kung fu tea. So why kung fu? So why kung fu tea? So think about it. So what is the meaning of kung fu or kung fu? Kung fu. Why the martial arts is called kung fu at all? It's actually kung fu is not martial art. It means you have to spend some time and then gain certain skill. This kind of skill is become power. But this thing requires time to learn. Yeah. So kung fu is a lifelong experience of learning. And then you start having something in your way of going. And this thing is shared interestingly shared in tea. Of course, it's also shared with martial arts, and the martial arts shared with Buddhism. Everything this can go together. This is one thing. I think I already got lost. What am I trying to say? Okay, varieties. Tea allows us to not thinking like a Coke. It is just the one taste. I had we have several student groups. And one time that one of my students group president, he gave a very excellent presentation. He brought 2 things with him. In his one package of suit, he have a Coke, and another he has a tea bag. He said for a Coke, you want to achieve a mono taste, a monoform, and every can of Coke must be the same. But tea, you can do that too. There are selling, the tea in the markets. They can achieve the same taste. We also want to achieve kind of like a stable taste of tea, but it gives us much more variety and change with respect of change. So in this pandemic, in this, the whatever you're talking about Asian, the movement, I think that also can help us to think, like Midori and Yoon Hee said, changing the mind side. Think about the Kung Fu tea, for example.
So Sherab, with the Kung Fu tea concept, really for any one of us who, regardless of what title external organization have bestowed on us, we are ultimately first and foremost lifelong tea students.
Oh yeah.
Because forever, once you start the journey of tea, it is many lifetimes over. Because the more we learn, the more we know. We realize just how little we do know, and that's the fun of it all. Because with tea, you don't tire, you don't frustrate, because there's so much more and delicious ways to find out. So we're students.
Yeah, that's a really lovely point. And then, of course, the fun, another aspect and fun part is that sharing with others, and then exchanging and learning from each other's other. Well, so thank you, everybody, for your comments and your time. It's time to end our program. So let's enjoy ourselves together, in viewing an interpretation of tea in performance art. We're going to show and view a dance by ArtLab J, a Detroit-based dance company led by Jury Jung, and that is inspired by choreographers' experiences with darye, a core concept in Korean tea ceremony. We hope you enjoy it. And so thank you so much for joining us this evening, and good night.
Thank you, Katharine. Thank you, Midori.
Thank you, Katharine. Thank you. Thank you, Midori Sherab.
Thank you.
Talking to you.
Keep in touch.